taillights of Damon's car disappeared down the two-lane highway, their red glow shrinking until the night swallowed them whole. I stood beneath the buzzing sign of a convenience store, the parking lot nearly empty except for a truck idling near the pumps. The laughter from inside the car still echoed in my ears, sharp and mocking, as though it had been aimed to pierce whatever dignity I had left. For a moment, I gripped my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. 400 kilometers from home, stranded without transportation. I thought panic should have consumed me, yet, strangely, it didn't. Instead, a hush settled over me, a calm I hadn't known in years. Fear gave way to something else, an unsettling, quiet relief. Images from earlier in the day flickered in my mind. Marco Whitmore's smirk as he mocked the way I packed my suitcase, Lila's high laugh that followed every insult, and Damon, my own son, joining in, desperate to be part of their world. I had smiled then, the way I always did, hoping the moment would pass. But the smile had burned like ash in my throat. The phone in my purse buzzed. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. A message from Damon lit the screen. "Lighten up. Mom, it's just a joke." The words blurred for a second as my chest tightened. I read them again, slowly, as if to be sure I hadn't misunderstood. A joke. That's all my presence had become to them. I looked up at the highway stretching into the darkness, the distant sound of their laughter still lingering in my memory. For years I had endured their jabs, swallowed my pride, and told myself it was easier to stay quiet. But tonight, something felt different. As I tucked my phone back into my purse, a thought pressed against my mind, sharp, undeniable. This wasn't the end of me. It might be the beginning. I was 19 when Damon's father died in a construction accident. Overnight, my world shifted. One day, I was a young wife with dreams of building a life. The next, I was a widow with an infant in my arms and bills piled higher than I could see over. I worked nights at the diner, mornings cleaning offices, and whatever hours I could squeeze in sewing alterations for neighbors. Some weeks I skipped meals so Damon could have seconds. I told myself it was worth it. His small hands wrapped around mine were proof enough. For years, he was gentle. He clung to me when I came home exhausted, kissed my cheek, and whispered that one day he'd take care of me. I believed him. I carried those words like armor, a promise that the sacrifices would someday be honored, but life has a way of shifting quietly, without announcement. When Damon married Lila Whitmore, I saw the change almost immediately. Her family polished, wealthy. Loud welcomed him into their circle with the warmth of fire. But I was kept at the edge of the flame, a shadow at the wall, at dinners. They poked fun at my southern drawl, my thrift store dresses, my quiet manners. So quaint, they said, as if I were an exhibit. And Damon, my Damon laughed with them. At first it was nervous laughter, but soon it was full, unrestrained, like he'd been waiting all his life for their approval. Each time he laughed, I forced a smile, swallowing the ache in my throat. I told myself it was love to endure in silence. That family harmony was worth more than my pride. Yet, somewhere deep inside, I began to wonder if endurance was not love at all, but slow erasure. That thought lingered, faint but steady, as the Whitmores' voices grew louder and my own voice dimmed to almost nothing. And now, standing alone at that store, the memory of their laughter felt like proof that silence had never protected me. It had only taught them I was safe to mock. The road stretched long and flat, pine trees hemming us in on both sides. But inside the car, the air was anything but calm. Lila scrolled through her phone while her brother mocked the way I had folded my clothes. "Looks like she packed for a funeral, not a weekend," he said, and laughter erupted from the back seat. My suitcase, neatly folded with 3 blouses and a cardigan, became their punchline for the next half hour. I reached for the small bag of trail mix I had portioned into little packets. Damon had always liked them as a boy. I thought he still might, but as I passed them forward, Lila's mother wrinkled her nose. "Of course she brings bird food," she said. Damon chuckled, glancing at me as though unsure. But when the others howled, he let his laughter grow louder. Every gesture seemed to draw their fire. When I cleared my throat softly before speaking, Lila leaned toward her sister and whispered, "There she goes again with that librarian cough." Their giggles filled the car until my voice shrank back into silence. I pressed my hands together in my lap, the way I had always done when I needed to stay composed. But it felt different this time. My composure was no longer protecting peace. It was protecting their entertainment. When we finally pulled into a convenience store to fuel up, I noticed Damon leaning close to Lila's brothers. Their shoulders hunched, their eyes flicked toward me, and then the three of them burst out laughing. I didn't catch the words, but I knew the cadence. I had lived with that rhythm of ridicule too long not to recognize it. Then I heard one sentence, low but clear. "This will be epic." I looked at my son. He didn't look back. His laughter mingled with theirs. A sound I would never forget. It was the moment I understood I was not just the subject of their jokes anymore. I was being written out of the family altogether, erased under the guise of humor. And when Damon turned to me with a smile and asked if I could grab snacks for the road, I already knew what was waiting when I returned. The bags of chips and bottled water slipped from my hands when I saw the empty parking space. For a heartbeat, I stood frozen, scanning the lot as if the car might reappear, as if Damon would step out laughing, telling me it had all been a mistake. But the only sound was the buzz of the fluorescent lights above and the hiss of fuel from a nearby pump. They were gone. My phone vibrated in my purse. I didn't need to read the message to know it wouldn't hold concern, only mockery. Instead of calling, instead of pleading, I opened my wallet. The bills I had quietly tucked away over the years lay folded in the inner pocket. I had built that small reserve one grocery trip at a time, pocketing a few dollars of change, taking odd jobs, transcribing or tutoring online, telling no one. Even the birthday money Damon assumed I spent on trinkets was here, unspent, waiting. I had never planned an escape. At least, not consciously. Yet here I was, realizing that somewhere deep down, I had known a day like this might come. My hands steadied as I counted enough for a bus ticket, a few nights of food, and the courage to step into something unknown. The man at the next pump glanced over. He was older, kind eyes set in a weathered face. "Ma'am, you need a lift somewhere. It's a rough stretch out here." For the first time that night, I smiled not out of habit, but from something stirring inside me. "Thank you," I said gently, "but I'll manage." He nodded, as if he understood more than I had spoken. I slipped the bills back into my purse and straightened my shoulders. For years I had been waiting for someone else to take care of me, to recognize my worth. But tonight, standing alone in the glare of a convenience store light, I realized I could take the first step myself. I sat on the bench outside the store, the night air heavy with the scent of gasoline and pine. My phone was still buzzing in my purse, Damon's name flashing again and again. But I let it ring. Instead, I scrolled to Marjorie's number. My cousin and I hadn't spoken often over the years, but her voice had always carried a kind of steadiness I envied. She answered on the second ring. "Evelina." My throat tightened. "Marjorie, you don't need to explain," she interrupted, her tone firm but warm. "My guest room is yours as long as you need it." The relief that swept through me nearly unmoored me. For so long, I had felt like I had nowhere to land. To hear someone open a door without hesitation felt like being pulled from underwater. 2 hours later, The rural bus finally rumbled into the lot, headlights cutting through the dark. I boarded quickly, sliding into a worn seat near the middle. As the engine groaned and the countryside blurred by, I finally checked my phone. Damon's messages glared back at me first. "Mom, it's just a joke. Don't be so dramatic." Then irritation. "Pick up the phone." And finally, silence. As though he had run out of ways to minimize what he'd done, I turned the phone off. The quiet that followed felt cleaner than anything I'd heard in years. The driver, a silver-haired woman with tired eyes, caught my reflection in the mirror. After a while, she spoke. "You look like you've had a night." I gave a small laugh. That's one way to put it. She told me about her own past, a husband who belittled her until she finally walked away. "The hardest part wasn't leaving," she said, "steering through the dark. It was forgiving myself for staying so long." Her words landed inside me like an echo. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the window and let them settle. For the first time in years, I felt my chest expand fully, as though I could finally breathe. By the time the bus neared Savannah, I realized I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something I had been denied for too long. Marjorie's house in Savannah was modest, tucked between oak trees draped in Spanish moss. But to me, it felt like a sanctuary. Her guest room smelled faintly of lavender, the quilt on the bed soft from years of use. The first morning I woke there, sunlight filtering through lace curtains. I realized I hadn't slept so soundly in years. Marjorie wasted no time nudging me toward work. "You need something that's yours," she said, sliding a flyer across the table for a library outreach program seeking part-time help. I doubted anyone would want me, but she insisted. A week later, I was helping organize donated books for children in rural schools. My years of keeping meticulous lists, sorting household budgets, and scheduling endless doctor's appointments had given me skills I hadn't even recognized. The program director praised my attention to detail. For once, usefulness wasn't taken for granted. It was respected. At Marjorie's urging, I also began therapy. Sitting in that quiet office, I spoke words I had swallowed for decades. My therapist listened and then said gently, "Evelina, you didn't escape a prank. You escaped a cycle of emotional neglect disguised as humor." The clarity of that sentence shook me. I had been waiting for someone else to name what I already knew in my bones. Change came in small, deliberate steps. I cut my hair into a style I liked, short and practical. No longer caring whether Damon would call it too severe. I bought bright blouses from a second-hand shop, the kind Lila would have sneered at. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not a meek woman fading at the edges, but someone vivid, present, alive. On Saturdays, I signed up for a beginner's art class at a community center. With a brush in my hand, I felt years of quiet resentment melt into color on canvas. Each stroke seemed to declare, I am here. I exist. I matter. As the weeks passed, I noticed laughter coming more easily. Not forced, but rising from somewhere real. Slowly, surely, I was becoming someone I hadn't seen in decades. I was becoming myself again. It was a Tuesday morning at the library when I saw him. Damon stood just inside the glass doors, shoulders slumped, his shirt wrinkled as though he had slept in it. The sight of him after 2 weeks hit me like a tide I hadn't prepared for, but I stayed where I was, stacking children's books into neat rows. "Mom," he said softly, almost a whisper. "Please, can we talk?" I nodded toward a quiet corner, and he followed, his steps heavy. When we sat, I noticed the shadows under his eyes, the lines that seemed deeper than they should for his age. It was just a joke. He started, voice breaking, "Please come home." We didn't mean I held his gaze, but said nothing. The silence stretched, and I could see how it unsettled him. He shifted in his chair, rubbing his palms together like a boy caught lying. Finally, he blurted out what I hadn't expected. They barely talk to me anymore. Lila, her parents, her brothers, they act like I dragged them into something shameful. They say it made them look cruel. Even they think it went too far. For a moment, I almost pitied him. The family he had chosen over me had left him adrift the moment things soured. He looked abandoned, smaller somehow, as if the laughter he once clung to had turned against him. "I thought you'd always forgive me," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I didn't think you'd really leave." I folded my hands in my lap, steady, unmoved. He didn't realize yet that my absence wasn't punishment. It was liberation. As he searched my face for softness, for some opening, I knew the moment had come when his betrayal circled back to him. And I also knew this conversation was only the beginning of what needed to be said. Damon leaned forward, his hands clasped together, desperation pouring from his eyes. I could see the boy he once was flickering beneath the man who had chosen others' laughter over my dignity. For a long moment, I simply breathed, letting the silence settle heavy between us. Then I spoke. "Damon, you need to understand something. That night at the store, it wasn't the reason I left. It was only the moment I realized I didn't have to stay." He blinked, confusion shadowing his face. "What do you mean?" I reached into my purse and unfolded a worn envelope, the one I had carried for years without naming aloud. "I've been saving, little by little, birthday money, grocery change, extra work no one knew about. For more than 2 years, I've had enough set aside to live on my own." His mouth opened slightly, as if the words knocked the air from him. I wasn't waiting for a joke to break me. I continued. I was waiting for permission to finally see the truth. That night gave it to me. He shook his head, tears gathering. "I thought you'd always forgive me. That's what you do. You smile. You let it go." His voice cracked. "I didn't think you'd ever leave." I leaned closer. "Steady. Forgiveness without respect is not love. Damon, respect is not optional. Not from you, and not from them. Every time you laughed at their jokes, you chose their approval over my dignity." He dropped his gaze to the table, shoulders trembling, as if the weight of years had finally caught up with him. I felt no triumph, only clarity. For the first time in my life, I had spoken the truth without softening it. And as Damon sat silent, unable to answer, I knew there was more still to say, more that would decide what came next. Damon's voice cracked as he reached for my hand. "Mom, please, I'll go to therapy. I'll change. I'll prove it to you. Just come home." For a moment, I saw him as the boy who once promised to take care of me, the child I carried through sleepless nights and endless sacrifices. That memory tugged at me, but it could not erase the man who had sat in a car full of laughter while I stood outside in humiliation. "Damon," I said gently, pulling my hand free, "I don't doubt you want to change, but change is not a promise. It's years of work, and it's not my job to carry you through it anymore." He swallowed hard, tears sliding down his cheeks. "So that's it. You're just leaving me." I steadied my breath. "I'm not leaving you. I'm leaving the role you put me in. You have a chance to rebuild yourself, Damon. But you'll do it without me as your shield." His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might lash out. But instead, he sank into silence, the fight draining from him, the quiet stretched between us. Heavy, final, yet strangely tender. I stood, my purse slung over my shoulder, and turned toward the door. His silence followed me, pressing at my back, heavier than words of anger could ever be. When I stepped into the sunlight outside, I felt no bitterness, only release. There was one more step I needed to take, one more piece of this life waiting to be claimed as my own. The lease felt heavy in my hands, not from weight, but from meaning. Months had passed since that night on the lonely highway, and now I stood in the doorway of a small apartment overlooking the Savannah River. The walls were bare, waiting for me, for the life I would place within them. I set my boxes down, filled with secondhand dishes, notebooks, and canvases from my art class, on the shelves. I arranged books Damon once dismissed as dull novels, poetry, histories I loved. Each spine felt like a quiet defiance, proof that my choices no longer needed validation. On the wall above the sofa, I hung my first completed painting. The colors were uneven, the lines imperfect, but it was mine. Every brushstroke had been carved from a place I had reclaimed, a self that no longer hid behind silence. At night, the city lights shimmered across the water, and I would stand at the window, letting the cool air wash over me. I thought often of Damon, of the way he looked when the laughter finally died, when he realized what he had lost. A part of me hoped he was finding his own way, though I knew his journey was no longer mine to carry. I touched the glass and breathed in the quiet, the memory of that store, the empty parking space, the cruel text they no longer stung. They had become the doorway I had been too afraid to open on my own. They abandoned me, I whispered into the night, the words steady, certain, but I will never abandon myself again.